Welcome to the Roundup, True Crime with Mike. Here I give you an update to current cases so you can quickly catch up on today's or this week's happenings on some public cases. Welcome to an episode of the Roundup, True Crime with Mike. Today we are here to talk about the start of the trial and jury selection for the Richard Allen case, or the Delphi murders case, of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, who were murdered on February 13th, 2017. So 7 years after their murder, we're finally getting to a trial and start of it. So I have a panel here to talk about what's gone on and what we expect from the trial and some of the things that is going on. So let's first let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Or I think everybody's been introduced, but if you want to reintroduce yourself, we'll start with Jason.
I've got to unmute myself. So, Jason Blair, I'm the host of a podcast called The Silver Linings Handbook. And I, have obviously on my podcast, or not obviously, I've covered the Delphi case. I've gone on to the murder sheet to talk about that. And, my primary focus on the case has really been keeping the focus on the trial, on the victims, on their loved ones, and not some of the, I think, conspiracies or other bad behaviors that have been associated with the trial. So.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
My name's Anna. I have been following the case, mostly trying to follow the facts and not getting lost on the rabbit holes. For probably 4 or 5 years now, like a lot of people, just the sheer horror of what happened to those precious little girls kind of just dug into my psyche, and I couldn't let it go. And I was so invested in justice for them. I do not have as much knowledge as maybe some of the others on this panel, so I'm probably just going to provide some strong and unsolicited opinions about some of the shenanigans that have gone on in this lead up to the trial that we're starting.
Okay, thank you. And then our squirrel nut, Lydia.
Hi, my name is Lydia, and I have actually followed this case since the day that they published the photo of Bridge Guy. I was intrigued, and I followed the case really closely since then. I do consider myself kind of a deep diver on the case, and I take some of the nonsense around the case a little bit personally. I feel like some of the families have been unjustly damaged during what's gone on in the last 7 or 8 years, and I'm excited that it's finally going to trial, so maybe they can have a chapter that closes this year, and I'm just excited to be here and talk about it.
Okay, thank you. I think most people probably know it, but just to give a background, and maybe Jason can, because I think maybe he knows it the best, that these two girls, they were, I guess was it a holiday or just off from school or after school?
Yeah, it was a day off from school, February of 2017. Abby and Libby had been up that morning. They had actually been up late that night. They had been up that morning hanging out at her grandmother, Becky Patty's house. And they asked Libby's sister, Kelsey Germain, to give them a ride to a park in Delphi. And, having been there, it's a park that people in the town commonly use on a, very, very regular basis. But it's just a park with a long trail that goes out to this bridge, the Moon on High Bridge. And the bridge itself is something that isn't technically a part of the trail, but it's a 60 plus foot old railroad bridge. And the kids would sort of cross the bridge sort of as a sign of their courage or other things like that. And adults would sometimes walk to the edge of it or the beginning of it. But on that day, they set out on the trail. Kelsey dropped them off at a sort of spot that's halfway in the middle of the trail, and they walked out onto the bridge. But the girls weren't alone. there was someone who was following them who is known as Bridge Guy. And the reason why we know of him is that Libby and Abby were taking pictures on the bridge, and Libby actually recorded a video of him. And what we've learned as more information has come out, that there was a point where one of the girls said, and it was Abby, "Is it that guy behind me?" So they had had some kind of prior interaction that bothered them. And at some point on the tape, at least according to what the court records now say, is one of the girls said gun. And the prosecution theory is that Bridge Guy forced them, and we can tell a little bit from the audio that came out, down the hill. And what we learned in the last few days is that something happened at the bottom of the hill. The prosecution's theory is that it was meant to be a sexual assault, and something interrupted it at the bottom of the hill. You know, something distracted it or created a problem, or someone came in the area, something happened. And then that led to Bridge Guy taking them across the creek and killing them under a tree across the creek. There was a gun involved. Obviously the girl said gun, but there was also a bullet casing that was found, or excuse me, not a bullet casing, a full bullet that was ejected from a gun that was found at the scene. The prosecution says that matches Richard Allen's gun. And he originally became a suspect, in fact, because he walked himself in and reported to a conservation officer who was working on the case very early on that he was at the bridge. And the police have concluded he's the only one who has the coat, matches it, the bullet matches him. And since then, he's made 61 confessions. And I just want to, before we jump in, I want to say that from my perspective, outside of all the hoopla going around the case, this is a pretty straightforward case. You know, you have a bullet that matches ammunition and matches the strike marks, ejection marks. You might be able to dispute some of that science, but you have a man placing himself at the scene, him and his wife describing that he has the clothing of the person who was caught on the videotape. And then you have 61 incriminating statements, which include some confessions. Some confessions that don't make sense, but some that include details, like that interruption event that I discussed, details that law enforcement believes are the only ones who have. You know, in most places, if this were in New York City or Chicago or LA, this would be like a 4-day trial and goodbye. Actually, it wouldn't be a trial because your attorneys would have had the good sense to beat you into doing a plea deal. And I don't know what happened here, and he refused. But so that's where we are, a relatively sad, tragic, but I would say from a prosecution perspective, a relatively simple case. But there's a lot of hoopla around it, and that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation. So,
yeah, down with hoopla.
Okay, thank you for the summary. So let's just real quick where we are, or who knows by the time anybody watches this video. So we had just to make sure, we've had 2 days of jury selection. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yesterday, I heard we had gotten like some of the got like 10 of the jurors, and then they were working in the alternates. So today they finished the alternates, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
So then I understand, just to make sure, that Friday is going to be opening arguments. So that means they have Wednesday and Thursday off. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a transport day because some of the jurors will have to travel and they're going to be sequestered. So there is a travel day, and then Thursday the jury will be sworn in, and then Friday they should start the trial.
Okay, I mean, I guess, and I've heard that, so sequestered, so they're going to be put up in a hotel room and made sure that they can only talk to people or they're not supposed to talk to people, correct?
Correct. Yeah, which is good, and especially in this case. I mean, any of us who've lived through Karen Read can feel the importance of a sequestered jury. So, I mean, I feel for them. I wouldn't want to be in that position, but at the same time, I totally understand why that is happening and how important it is for this case, because there are a lot of crazy people around this case.
An interesting thing about that is, and I don't know if I've seen this in a lot of cases, but I suspect in this case, and this is just my speculation, that the sequestering has less to do with people getting access to media than it does with some of what some people call the cranks who are around the case, getting access to the jurors and saying something to them. So it's an interesting parallel to some of the things that we see in the Karen Reed case, but it's not about the media access. It's really about other people accessing the jurors.
100%. Yeah, it's not about media. It's about the Turtle Boys of the world. And, you know, I won't name them, but some of the people who've been super crazy in Delphi have probably led to this decision, which I disagree with. I think the trial should be accessible to the public. But at the same time, I really do understand why it's not, because of the fervor and insanity of true crime people around this case.
Correct. So let's, I guess, explore it, because I guess it's kind of interesting, because kind of you would think that with a trial that's this big that they would find a room that can have maybe 50 to 100 people, but it sounds like they can only have like up to three people from the public that's outside of the media.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Well, part of the problem is the trial is being run by Allen County, which is in Fort Wayne. That's the administrative staff. That's where the judge is from. Much larger courthouse, much smaller courthouse where it's actually, and the jurors are coming from Allen County, but it's actually being held in Carroll County, where there's a much smaller courthouse. Could you, in theory, have a media room where you piped in what was happening and you had media members? You could. But I think something's happened in this case that's really unfortunate. And I remember this from my reporting days back in New York. There's one publication that I'm not going to name that could be kind of idiotic about stuff. And we would be constantly admonishing the reporters from this publication, because we would say, the more you do, like, they're not going to differentiate between your crazy wackadoodleness and the rest of us. And every time you do these crazy things, it's just going to restrict all of us. And I think that's part of what's happened. The courts made the decision, I'm not going to try and differentiate between who the responsible people are and who are not. I'm just going to limit access as much as we can.
I agree.
And we're dealing with a case where in pretrial hearings, we've had creators who were kicked out of the courthouse and nearly arrested for their behavior. So I kind of get how we get here, even though I completely disagree with it.
Yep.
Well,
100%.
I think because even with the sequestered jury, but the decision to not have film or video or audio was made before the decision to sequester the jury was made. But even with a sequestered jury, the task of keeping all of that stuff from the jury members just becomes monumental when you have a case that has this much notoriety. And what I mean is, there are things during a trial that are done outside of the presence of the jury. And those are the things that are probably going to get put in YouTube clips and discussed and hashed over in the evenings. And just the idea of trying to keep, I think we ended up with 18 people or 16 people from seeing any of that they're not supposed to, when I think it would behoove Judge Gull to make this case as appeal-proof as possible. I don't love it. I wish we could watch it, but I don't hold it against her for making this kind of a radio silence situation.
Am I right? And I think this is true. In Indiana, cameras in the courtroom are still in their beta phase.
Correct.
So the judges have the opportunity to do it. But I think it goes deeper than that, because there are methods, there are means to handle those kinds of things. If you remember from the Murdaugh trial, they had a whole trial within a trial
Sure.
to determine whether evidence could come on. and that was televised. There are obviously ways you can keep the jury away from it. You can also close the courtroom for certain pretrial things. You can move certain things, discussions into chambers. You can have things on in sidebars, as long as it's in the record, right, for appeal. I think I think what the court is demonstrating here is probably absolute frustration with the media coverage and an inability, and particularly if they're paying attention to other trials like the Karen Reed trial, an inability to predict what kind of response there's going to be. And I think the reaction to that has been to just shut it down, which is a disservice to Richard Allen. It's a disservice to the public, but
it is.
But I can't say we've been surrounded on this case with responsible citizens. So
Correct.
I think we've been so spoiled that all the cases we've been able, even ranging from the one in Florida to the one in Las Vegas, the ones I've covered, have all been televised, even though they were not very big cases. And then we have this huge one, and we're not even going to be able to watch it. So we're going to have to rely on the people that are in there, like either tweeting it or the summarization at the end of the day. So it's going to be a whole different from what we've expected or what we've come to rely on.
What I find interesting, and I wish that Indiana would just take a look at some of these other trials, is we're all in, groups where we watch trials all day, every day. And the sensitivity that judges handle testimony and juries and everything that happens in the courtroom with is impressive. So they, have very specific instructions to the media about what witnesses they can and cannot film or record audio for. They cannot film the jury. Sometimes the judges, like Judge in Idaho, who is no longer the judge in the Koberger case, he was the one controlling the cameras. So he could control what was happening and what was being streamed to the public. And I think that it's so backwards not to have courts that are accessible in this way and that are handled sensitively by judges and the technology people that work in courts and the media that's streaming it. I mean, there just haven't been a lot of issues with things being covered that shouldn't have been covered in the 8 million trials that we've all watched together that justify this kind of secrecy, in my opinion. That being said, Kevin and Anya said, this courtroom is tiny. The acoustics are terrible. There's nowhere for the media to set up. It's not practical for there to be a place for there to be a feed. So I get it. I get all of that. But I think that in general, in Indiana, there needs to be a little bit of sunshine on the judicial process.
Well, and it's been a problem throughout the whole case from the beginning. I mean, you could do a case study on both the way law enforcement's handled it and also the way the courts have handled it. I mean, certainly you could do a case study on the defense, but that would be a whole different story.
That would be mine.
I think, one of the things, Delphi happened in 2017. It's a real interesting moment where social media is growing. It had been growing since the early aughts, but it's really, really growing at that point. YouTube is becoming more prominent in the years after that. But it started with some of the old media rules, right? Where you're dealing with newspapers, television stations, radio stations, and you're doing press releases and you're doing news conferences and you're feeding the beast to sort of like keep up awareness, to investigate the case. I don't think the Delphi law enforcement community was prepared for the new media circus that exists right now, conspiracy theories, crazy YouTube channels, people doing and printing and sharing irresponsible things. And I think it was a real shock both to the court system and the law enforcement. But them taking that old media approach created this giant vacuum.
Yeah.
And in that vacuum came an enormous amount of speculation, conspiracy theories, and we've seen those things actually make it into court filings, which is wild. So I do think they're kind of making the mistakes they were making before when it comes to the public really being able to trust the outcome.
I agree totally. I think the vacuum is really the problem in Delphi, and it's upsetting, and I feel bad for the families. But that being said, I will say I feel like the vacuum was created with the best intentions. I think that the ISP had the best intentions for this case, and they wanted it solved, and they didn't want to show their hand. And unfortunately, they were in an era, like you said, that was changing, and they weren't prepared for what would happen. And I think that's sad. I think it's heartbreaking for the ISP, honestly, and the families, but it is what it is.
I really feel compelled to defend Judge Gull's decision here. As much as I hate the decision she made, I think based on what she's had to deal with and knowing the character of the characters in this trial, I don't blame her for not wanting to have to wrangle pool cameras and all of that on top of it. I mean, this was not the best case to be a guinea pig case for videos and cameras in the courtroom. She attempted it for one hearing. That was the hearing that backfired on her in many, many ways. But apparently, the rumor has it that one of the pool cameras did something that she expressly forbade them not to do. And so at that point, she was like, no more cameras. And then the shenanigans that have gone on in this case by the people that she has to allow in the courtroom have been just so far-fetched and unbelievable. If you were writing a movie, nobody would believe this. The script would be turned down for just what has gone on in this case. And so I think when she's faced with the decision of knowing she has to wrangle the defense clowns, I'm just going to say it, you guys can agree or disagree, and knowing that they're going to put on a three-ring circus if they can, and if there are cameras catching them, they're going to be even worse. I don't have any ire towards Judge Gull for making the decision she did, even if I wish she had made a different one.
And Anna, I mean, I agree that her first responsibility is to ensure that Richard Allen has a fair trial. And everything else comes ahead of that. And if she believes that these things will get in the way of him having a fair trial, I think, doing this is it. But she also has a responsibility to provide public access. And it exists constitutionally for several reasons, one of which is that the defendant's rights are protected by public having access to the trial, right? Inappropriate legal decisions, evidence that shouldn't get in, lies that someone notices while watching or hearing about what happens in the trial can have real negative impacts on the defendant if those things aren't addressed. I mean, even looking at something like the Alec Baldwin trial, and at the last minute, someone coming up with information about evidence that wasn't a part of the case. Public access can help with those things. And there's a second throng to it, which is the public has access for another reason constitutionally, and that is so we can have faith and hold our justice system accountable.
Correct.
And while the media is a conduit that's a part of that process, it's really something that the public has the right to do. So I would argue, yes, I understand why she would restrict maximizing it, but your job as a judge is to find a way to balance the public interest. And I think that there are a lot of half measures we've seen in between. You could release audio like they did in Lori Vallow case. You could have an audio feed running directly to a media room. There are a lot of different options, but I think what happens, judges are humans too. You just get so frustrated with it that you
I
stop.
think it's a trust issue. I
Mhm.
really think that she can't trust the people on YouTube and the people on Twitter not to spin it and make it bad. And so I think she
But-
was.
But I think her job is to solve for that and still balance both interests.
Agree.
Like,
But-
I think that you're never going to control the nut jobs on any social media platform. So, like, take that out of the equation. What I don't understand about Gull's decision, I do understand maybe not having a live video feed is practical. I get all of that. What I don't understand is denying every single request for a daily written transcript, a daily written, audio feed, whatever. That makes no sense to me. It's a zero cost, situation for them to record the audio or have a transcript or whatever and provide the details to the media every single day. That makes no sense. You're never going to get out in front of the crazy people around that case. I get it. But the public has a right to access the details of this trial, and it should be in some format that's digestible and transmissible to the general public. And the media in Indiana has made that point over and over and over again. And she has just said no to every form of it. And I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, but I guess the problem with that is that what she's doing also leaves to the conspirators that she's doing this to hide things too. So,
And she's not. I don't believe that for 1 second. I believe she's old school. And I also believe that she's tired of everyone's BS, which I completely understand.
And
And I am as well. But
I think she's been burned as well. And so
and she has
might
been
be-
burned. Yes.
She might be reactionary to that. She's human.
She's the phone smasher. She said, I let you guys in here. I told you what to do. You didn't do it. And now I'm done. And I get that. I totally get that. Jason knows. I get that. Rules are important. But we have to have a public record of this trial that isn't Bob Mata writing something down on a post-it note while he's hangry and complaining about how uncomfortable the seats are. We
I would
have
just
to
say
have
the remedy to people violating the rules is punishing people for violating the rules.
Correct.
It's not to cut off public access.
Yes. Agree.
correct. I mean, yeah, I guess I don't understand. They could just have the video cameras in back and film it like a movie studio or something.
Again,
And that they
I
should
think
be able to figure this out.
I think
The
it comes back to
courtroom-
something way more human. And I know we're trying to look through the logic at it, but I think it's way more human than that. The judge is mad, right?
Of
Mad
course.
at the defense, mad at the media, mad at the new creators, and she's just trying to rein in her courtroom. I don't disagree. I do disagree with the way that she's approaching it. And just like the way she approached removing the attorneys, and this is not to say she's not a good judge, because she certainly seems to be able to run a courtroom well. But
Yeah.
when she tried to remove the defense attorney, she didn't make a good record.
Yeah.
I don't feel like she's making the right calls in the interests of the defendant, the public, and the victim's family when it comes to media access. There are plenty of areas where she seems to be doing just fine, but
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic now. I guess so opening statements on Friday. So what are we expecting from both sides? Let's first start with the state. McClellan. I don't know how much we know about him. I guess I think we're all just disappointed in how bad the Karen Reed opening was by the state. So we do hope that the opening by the prosecution in this one is a little bit better. So my understanding is they're probably going to make it it's going to make it simple that Richard Allen was the bridge guy. As Jason said, he had the coat, he had the clothing. He looks. I mean, it kind of looks like it. We have the bullet that is matching his gun, and that this guy has confessed like too many times to count. So I don't know how long or what he's going to do for openings. So any thoughts on what the state's going to open with?
I suspect, you know, I was having a conversation with someone about this yesterday, and they had asked me whether I would be nervous, and I said, like, I'm nervous every time I go before, get ready to do a public speech or go in front of a public body. But once it's time, once it's game day, I think a lot of that nervousness goes away. And I think what we've seen from McClelland is he's a pretty cool operator, pretty clear in his questioning, in the narrative. You know, you certainly saw that in the pretrial hearings. Very astute, landed points very well. I suspect he's going to tell the story of Abby and Libby's day, pause at the bridge, and then tell the story of Richard Allen's day, and then build the intersection from there. I suspect he'll walk through after he tells the compelling narrative, he'll walk through the narrative of how they collected the evidence, how Richard Allen and his wife reacted to their presentation of the evidence, and then through every confession that includes details that were not publicly known or handed over to the defense. And I think it's a fairly easy, simple narrative for the opening statement.
I agree. I think you said this earlier today, Jason. This is a very simple and straightforward case. And I think that a lot of the noise around the case has made it seem like it's more complicated than it is. But Nick McClelland has spent almost 8 years with the evidence in this case. And it's so straightforward and simple. I cannot imagine that the opening statements from the state will be complicated or confusing. The man that is accused of committing this crime said he was there that day, dressed in the clothes that this brave little girl took a video of him in, approaching her and menacing her and her friend. And multiple witnesses said that they saw this same person dressed in these same clothes at the time that he was there. I just can't.
And Lydia, it doesn't matter because he said he was there.
He said he was there. I don't understand how you can make it complicated when this man said he was there in the clothes at the time the girls were abducted and at the time that all the witnesses said he was there. This is such a simple case. And my black and white juror brain goes there automatically, but I do not understand how people make this case complicated. This is the guy.
I can think of how this could have become complicated. And if you go back a couple months, I could have easily seen this being a very difficult opening statement. But once Judge Gohl excluded some of the conspiracy theories, you see this in the Karen Reed case. Part of what went wrong was that the prosecutor just was not a good storyteller or wasn't a good storyteller for his opening. But part of what went wrong was that the prosecutor in the Karen Reed case decided to defend the state's case against conspiracy theories in the opening statement. And the one thing I'll tell you about any argument, you never start defending it against someone else's theory because you're ceding to them the validity of it. They had to go in, the prosecution had to go in and knock down the silliness of the Odinist cult killing version that the defense had. It could have muddied it, or it would have made the tough choice. Do you just ignore it and do you just tell the story? But once those things were excluded and some of the alternate suspects that either have alibis or the reasons why they have been excluded, it got really simple.
Yeah.
I will say that
I mean, Nick McClelland would have to try hard to make this a bad opening statement.
for sure.
true story. I will say that I was willing to. I've always leaned guilty, but I was willing to give Richard Allen the benefit of the doubt, his constitutional right to the presumption of innocence, and see the case that the state presented until the confessions. The confessions really swayed me, and I think that if Nick McClelland doesn't include those in his opening statement, that's a big mistake, because your opening statement is basically telling the jurors what to look for. And so I think he does hit all of those points that you guys already talked about. But I think that he reads verbatim the most damning confession there is. Or if it's recorded, plays the audio. If it's one of the calls with his wife or his mom. I think he has to start by introducing those confessions from the start.
I actually think it's going to be relatively simple, because I think what we're going to find is that there are different points of dispute about the timeline that the confessions are going to answer the questions to. You know, throwing out a hypothetical that's come up and people have debated. And this is one that I have from multiple people who have access to it, that there was a vehicle in the area that drove by on the access road. It was not publicly known, but if one of his confessions includes a mention of that vehicle, you just ride that right into the narrative. Like, how do we know? This witness said that they drove by at this point and saw this. You know who else said it?
Yep.
Richard Allen, right?
Yep.
And so I think I think they'll just be weaved right into the narrative.
Yeah, it's so.
Because the message to hammer home is, what's our best evidence against Richard Allen? His own
Richard
words.
Allen.
His own words.
It's Richard Allen. Yeah, it's such the zebra versus.
I'm kind of jealous. I wish I could give this opening statement, but go on.
I know, right?
Yeah, I wanted to do the Karen Reed one. I think I had written it out at one time, and
Oh my god!
I think in the Karen Reed they should have started with her call 7 minutes afterwards. I think he should do.
Yeah,
So
right.
let's move on then. Let's move to what is the defense strategy. To me, I mean, I guess we'll have to see if like how crazy what they're going to go with it, because I think the simpler approach and the one that's probably more boring, but is just I think they're just going to attack how. I think they're going to try to attack how sloppy the police investigation was and how long it took. If it was such an easy case, why did it take 7 years to find him or whatever? And just attack. I think that's what they're going to attack. The one thing, I guess, if they can prove, the one thing that might get in the way is if they can prove that the phone did something at 4 a.m, that might be their best defense if they can show anything with that. But
I think they'll introduce that. That's really the only thing they have left that hasn't been denied by Gull. They did lay the groundwork for some mysterious hair that was found. I think they will try to harp on that. I think that there's probably state witnesses that are going to make that go away. I did read some transcripts of the state witness response to the phone thing, and I think they have a really good witness that can explain that. But I think the defense will just try to latch on to anything that they hope will plant a seed of doubt. I feel like Nick McClelland is going to have a very measured, very thoughtful, very laid out, like boom, 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 boom. I have every expectation, whether it's Rosie or Baldwin or both that do the defense opening, it's going to be disjointed, it's going to be confusing, and it's all going to be done on purpose.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, I'm glad you guys have that confidence, because I have honestly, no earthly idea. This is a case. So you've got a guy who's got 61 confessions. Or 61 incriminating statements, many of them confessions. We have some evidence from the pretrial hearings that part of what happens during those confessions is he decides not to plead guilty because his family doesn't want him to or doesn't believe it, right?
Right.
This is a case that is made for an Alford plea, where you can simply say, Mike?
Sorry, well, it's a distract. Alford pleas are just overly known, and they're not. Alford pleas have their own set of circumstances, and that
They
does
do.
not apply.
They do.
It's-
They absolutely do. But if you have a defendant in a case who does not want to admit responsibility but wants to cede the case, and you have a prosecution that's willing to accept that, it's the simple answer. Because if what's holding Richard Allen back from pleading guilty is simply that he doesn't want to say he did it, that's a simple way to deal with it.
But I don't think Nick McClelland in a million years would go that route. Nick McClelland,
Well,
no.
the judge would have to agree. It would be the judge
Nick-
that would have to agree with it.
I just think that Nick would never, ever go there. I honestly think he is on a mission. I don't think he's going to accept anything other than
But
the justice that these families deserve.
Yeah, but the prosecutor can't stop you from accepting responsibility. Like the prosecutor, there's nothing they
Oh,
can do.
no.
But they don't have to offer an
But
Alford plea.
not
I mean,
an Alford plea.
yeah.
They don't have to
Not
offer
an
a
Alford
deal.
plea.
But
They don't have to offer a deal. They don't have to agree to
He
any
would
of it.
not offer a deal.
Correct. They don't have to offer a deal. They don't have
Right.
to. But we obviously have a person in this case, and this is the part where I feel bad for Richard Allen,
Yeah,
who
he's
has clearly
confessed.
demonstrated that
Yeah.
he wants to confess.
He wants
the
to
reason
confess.
why he hasn't, the person that's stopping him is his lawyers.
Or his
Well,
mother.
his wife,
mother.
his mother. There's
His mother.
there's family pressure, and I don't think we know that there's legal pressure. I think.
We know.
I think it's his
No,
mom.
I mean, I honestly don't think we know.
I think it's his mom.
We don't know that the lawyers aren't sitting in the background saying, "Good God, please! All we have is this crazy crap." But we definitely know. We definitely know from statements that he made in his confessions that there is
Right.
pressure from the family.
He cares about what his wife and his mother think. And that is what is keeping him from just pleading guilty, in my opinion.
But at the same, I
And
guess
he believes-
I was gonna say
he
the
believes
hardest
it's his
part.
attorneys.
Sorry. So the hardest part is with the normally with the plea deal, you want to be able to get something for your plea deal, and I guess I know Brett.
He's not going
Brett talked about he's not
But
the death penalty is off the table, so he doesn't
Mike,
he's not going to be
something-
executed. But I mean,
the something that Richard Allen so clearly wants
Correct.
is peace.
Correct.
What Richard Allen really wants is peace. He
Agreed.
doesn't want to have to go over the details of it in public.
Agreed.
He wants to. He said that there's a religious element to it.
Yep.
That he wants to end this, and this is an opportunity for him to give about the only thing he can give the family, not put
Right.
them for trial.
And I think that is at the heart of the
And
confession.
that's the deal.
That
That's
is
the
the
deal.
deal.
The deal that Richard Allen can have is not one that the prosecution can even offer. It's
Right.
peace.
100%. It's
But-
not, there's no negotiation here. I think the issue is Richard Allen wants this to be over with, which he's expressed 61 plus times. And it is not about what can you give me from, the state side. It's about he wants this to be over with. He wants to tell people what he did, and his attorneys should allow him to do that. in
They
my
never
opinion.
ever will.
well,
And they won't.
but
won't.
if he wanted, he could play. I mean, he doesn't even have to do anything. All he could do is go and say, "I plead guilty to the charges," and he hasn't. So, I mean, you don't have to get a plea deal. You don't have to get an Alford plea. You just say, I plead guilty." The first
that
question they
comes
ask
back to
you
the-
is
That-
do you
that-
want to? How do you want to plead? you stand up and say, I plead guilty.
But I think
no
That
contest.
comes down to like the thing he wants more than that is for his family to love him, right?
Correct.
And if they're making the
Wow.
requirement of that love, you not admitting it, this is where I truly feel
yeah, that's
I
sad.
feel for him because
I
in so
agree.
many ways, obviously heinous things happen in this case, but it certainly seems like since in the period those confessions were happening, he wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And the right thing would be to accept responsibility. That has been thwarted not by Nick McClellan. That has not been thwarted by anyone that we're aware of. That's been thwarted, I guess, ultimately by his choice, but really his family's opposition. So you can tell, just like if you were sitting in a negotiation, I'm not confused by what this guy wants. He doesn't want fewer years in jail. He doesn't want any of that stuff. He simply wants peace and does not want embarrassing details to come out. That is,
I agree.
that's like a defendant who was willing to plead with themselves.
And it's sad. That part is really sad, honestly.
I agree.
Well, but I mean, but he has that option. I mean, he's had that option since the beginning. He could have pled guilty and said, "I did it."
But I don't know if he feels like he has that option. I guess
I don't think he does.
What I'm saying. I think he feels like his only options are connected to his wife and his mom, and I don't think he feels like he has that option. I wish he did.
I think that
Because
his wife.
at the end of the day, all he has for the rest of his life, guaranteed, or thinks, is that it's the love of his family. So is he going to give that up to do the right thing here? Probably not. And this is just an unfortunate situation. I don't know what I would do if I were in the family's position and it were my loved one. But I think if I step back, you'd want to, I think Brett from the prosecutors has made this point that no matter how heinous something is that you've done, whether you're on the death row or not, you have an opportunity to make the most of the rest of your life.
Right.
And I feel like he had an opportunity to get that started. That's been snatched away both by his emotions and the reaction to his position.
I honestly think it's been snatched away by his attorneys because I feel like left to his own devices, obviously Mr. 61 Confessions would have confessed. But we have these Netflix wannabe attorneys feeding him some nonsense. I don't know.
And they're also feeding nonsense to his family. They are the ones telling him, no, don't confess. They're the ones telling his family, we can get him off. And so the family is telling him, no, don't confess. We don't want to hear it. The attorneys are saying, stick with us. We got you. We're not going to let you down. And I truly believe in a lot of ways, Richard Allen and tangentially his wife and his mother are also victims in this. And the villains in this case are Andy Baldwin and Brad Rosie.
Yep.
Well, maybe what will happen is maybe he'll do an interview afterwards and talk about it and say how much role the attorneys had in it.
I just don't like the idea of somebody who wants to confess 61 times being held up as this crazy hero by these weird attorneys and their flying monkeys on social media. I'm just saying.
What do you mean?
I'm saying if this man wants to unburden himself so badly that he confesses to literally every organism that is living near him for the past 2 years. And then the only thing saving him from that is these crazy attorneys and their crazy social media supporters pretending that he's innocent and making up complete and utter garbage about the case, which has been proven from the beginning to be inaccurate. Like literally everything in every one of their filings has been proven to be complete garbage. why not just let the man plead guilty? How is your obligation to your client not to let them do what they want to do, which is confess to the crime that they've committed?
Because their
How
main
did they
obligation is to
sleep
their
at night?
pocketbook.
But how do they sleep at night?
They
How
don't.
do
They sleep like a
Can I-
baby because they have no
Can I
conscience.
caveat one thing in all of this? You know, I do think that some of it can be the defense attorneys, and I suspect some of it is from what we've seen. But we've been talking about his family as a monolith. I don't think that they're necessarily a monolith. I suspect there are people in his family who would be happy with him confessing.
That may be true.
It's just that some of the most
Um,
crucial ones are not.
The problem is that sometimes we don't know everything that's going on in the background, and we're making assumptions. But so
I mean,
hopefully,
I
maybe
feel his family are victims as well. I know. I mean, I personally know people who are victims in that way, and I don't want to say anything about what they're feeling or anything else, but his attorneys have an obligation to represent his best interests. And I think that his best interests are what he has expressed 61 times.
And
And
I
that
think
is that he confessed to committing these murders. Why not just let the man confess and plead guilty and go towards the light? Like, just, I don't get it.
And I think that the reason I put the blame at Baldwin and Rosie's feet on this is part of their job is to do what's best for their client. And if
Yes.
he's confessing and he is expressing to them that he wants to confess, which I have no doubt that he did, I would bet good money on that. Their job is also to go to his family and say,
Right.
this is bad. This is going to be hard to deal with, but he wants to confess. We believe him when he says that he did do this. We are going to get the best deal we can for him,
Yeah.
but you have to get okay with this. And I think that's where Baldwin and Rosie, they're telling the family, we've got him. He's not guilty. We're going to get him off. They're telling him, don't say that. We're going to get you off. We have a good case. And that's why the
I
villain
would
in
just say, like,
the attorney.
I think it's easy to sort of like demonize the defense attorneys. I'm no fan of their behavior. You know, the leak itself of the photos of the crime scene and the leak of the blood on the tree were all, you know, at the very minimum, in the best light, incompetence, if not something worse. But I think you have to be careful. We don't know what's going on in the background. I mean, I see reasons why they may want to make the trial go on, but if I were sitting in their shoes and I were looking toward media exposure or a Netflix deal or something like that, I would not want this trial to happen, because this is not, I don't think it's going to be good for the defense attorneys. I think the reality is they may very well be in the background saying, look, you should try to get a deal. You should confess. There's no point in doing this. And, you know, you brought up Bob Mata, and I'm going to give him one here because he describes in the Anthony Garcia serial killer trial in Nebraska that ultimately you can give whatever advice you want to your client. It's ultimately, to Mike's point, it's up to them to decide. You can give them advice to confess. They have all the evidence in the world against you. And if that client says, no, I'm not going to do it, you have to go out, like flip on a dime, be a different human being, and argue the opposite of everything you believe.
But Jason, in real life, do you think these boys, do you think Rosie and Baldwin are doing that with Richard Allen? Or do you think, I don't.
I don't.
I think that Richard Allen is,
if his real issue is his wife and his mother, it doesn't matter what they're doing with him.
I agree. And I don't think that they're kind of curating his experience to be the best for him. I think that
I do
They
agree.
are manipulating him to do what they want for Netflix or whatever their motivation is, so social media or whatever. But they are not. I have so much conflict about this case because I really truly feel like this is one of the most poorly represented murder defendants that I have ever seen in true crime. I think that he is being the most poorly served by his attorneys. And I am not someone who generally is like, oh, I feel sorry for a murder defendant. As you know,
I almost choked on my wine again.
I know, I'm sorry. But I just don't feel like this man's rights are being protected by his attorneys in any way.
I
just
agree.
don't.
I have no. I don't have evidence of that. I have evidence like the leaks and other things like that, and some of the ways they've handled different things that points in the exact direction. I'm just saying. I think we should probably be cautious about assuming we know anything about the advice that they're giving him, because I don't think we do. I mean, I have suspicions, right? But that's not evidence.
Sure.
What I do have evidence of are Richard Allen's own words about his wife and his mother.
Right.
Well, I have my
No,
own,
it's
but
just
there's nothing I
sad.
can prove from my own suspicions. So I think this is probably a good spot to kind of wrap up for the day, unless there's anything major somebody wanted to talk about. I'm not. And my shows don't quite go on as long as other people's, so I try and wrap it up. And
Anyone want to bet against me on this is on the I say it's one day for the jury and then
Oh, for sure, one day. But I would just like to say one thing, and this, you can just cut this out. The person I feel the most sorry for outside of the victims is Kathy Allen. And I feel like Kathy Allen has gotten so much crap online, and I'm 100%
she's a
sure
secondary victim. She's a secondary victim.
she is a secondary victim, and she had no idea who she was living with. And it just outrages me how mean people are about her online. And I feel for her. So
I agree. She's
Okay.
been mistreated.
well,
I think she is in a nightmare,
yeah.
and every time she tries to wake up, she realizes that the dream just took another terrible turn.
Yeah. It's
I do. My heart does go out to her as much as it does anyone else. I can't even fathom
Yeah.
having your world turned upside down. And I know Lydia, when we saw that she had to sell the house, those cabinets, those kitchen cabinets,
Oh, the cabinets break my heart.
like she had to give up her kitchen cabinets, those beautiful blue kitchen cabinets that you know that she probably spent hours picking that color.
I know.
She was married to a man she didn't know.
Yeah, it breaks my heart. It's just like, breaks
Yeah.
my heart.
well, I will keep it in, but let's go ahead and wrap it up. Let's plan on. Can we do this again like Tuesday night?
Yeah.
Do a
Okay.
weekly thing.
Or well, we'll see how the trial's going. But let's plan on Tuesday after opening statements on Friday, and then several days of witnesses. We'll have to see what we get from Twitter and social media since we can't watch it. But thank you all for joining, and I will get this posted later today.
Thanks
So
for
hang
having
on
us.
1 second, and
Night,
I'm gonna.
everyone.
Like,